I think especially during Pride Month, leaning into the places of trans joy because we need that.
From Interfaith Alliance, this is The State of Belief. I'm Interfaith Alliance President Reverend Paul Brandeis Rauschenbusch in New York City.
All of the ways that we celebrate who we are in our existence, a spiritual kind of thing for me of sort of seeing the ways that I reflect the image of God, whether that's, trans joy that delights in their creativity and their art. I think that we are people that create and recreate ourselves.
June is Pride Month, and celebrations across the country are as colorful and diverse as is the LGBTQ plus community itself. And that includes countless people of faith. This week on The State of Belief, I'll be talking with Reverend Kimble Sorrells, a United Church of Christ pastor in Atlanta and a passionate advocate for social justice. The Faith for Pride initiative is in its third year, and our treasured partner organizations in this important work include Keshet, which works for LGBTQ equality in Jewish life and beyond. I'll be joined by Keshet Community Mobilization Manager Lanie Cohen. As we keep growing our library of extraordinary interviews, I want to make sure you're subscribed to the State of Belief podcast. Please visit stateofbelief.com/subscribe. You'll hear this episode in full, as well as recent interviews with Rainn Wilson, Dr. Anthea Butler, Rob Reiner, John Pavlovitz, Rabbi Sharon Brous, Bishop William Barber, and many others. It would really help us to have you subscribe, rate, and tell people you're close to about all that you're hearing. The State of Belief is made possible in great part by the generous support of our listeners. If you made a donation, thank you for helping get these conversations heard by more people who need them. If you haven't pitched in yet, information on how to do that is available at stateofbelief.com, and you can find out more about the work of Interfaith Alliance and join us at interfaithalliance.org. So happy Pride, everyone. I wanted to start this episode by just sharing some gratitude that I'm feeling right now, which is, just pretty profound, and how fortunate I am, and realizing that fortune. I just started writing down for my own edification, like all the things I'm grateful for today as a gay man, and starting with having a husband. I mean, the idea of even having a husband and having an amazing husband and partner in Brad, having two incredibly wonderful kids. All of this, happened because people worked really hard to make it happen, and I'm the beneficiary of so much hard work that people did that, I was involved in, but I'm so grateful for my life and for the fact that I have my immediate family that is incredible, and then I have a wider family that loves me, like my brothers and sisters, my nieces and nephews, my cousins. There's just, they're not any lingering judgments. There's no question marks for them around my family. They love us. And, aside from, how I can be annoying at times, it's not because I'm gay, it's just because I'm annoying. But, I just am so grateful for my family, both the family that I've created, but also the family that I was born with. I like to say my nieces and nephews, like for them, LGBTQ equality is not a debate. They're not asking those questions anymore. And, I like to say, like, if anybody came from my family, they'd have to go through my nieces and nephews to get to us. They're just incredible. And, part of the reason I'm so lucky is that, and the reason I feel so passionate about this work is I'm grateful for the church I was raised in. I was raised in a church that I never heard an anti-gay sermon. A lot of people hear it all the time from the pulpit. I never heard that. We had a woman pastor in the 70s, and so and the church I grew up in, which I always thought of as kind of milquetoasty and like, oh, whatever. Now I realize it was really a welcoming place. It was, that I felt completely welcome there, and never heard anti-LGBTQ rhetoric, never. And then I went on to, to go to seminary and to experience churches, working in them and participating in them, that were so welcoming, and also like that we're on the front lines for LGBTQ equality. And so I feel very fortunate that throughout my life, religion has also been a welcoming place, a life-giving place, a life-saving place for me. And that's part of the reason I went into the ministry. Was I found such welcome in these communities that really, part of their ministry was recognizing LGBTQ equality in all its forms. And so I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for the places I've worked, all the churches I've worked in that took, these incredible stances and said, we're going to be welcoming and affirming. And a lot of them got kicked out of fellowships. They got a lot of negative flack for it, but they made stances, and it made a place for me to be able to do ministry. I'm grateful for being able to work in educational institutions like Columbia and Princeton, where that wasn't a question mark. My sexuality was never, it was okay. I mean, there were people who, didn't agree with it, but that's fine. The institution itself had totally by that time arrived. And again, that's a lot of work that went in there. And so I'm just grateful for all the people who came before me, who opened up these spaces. And that part of the reason I do this work is to continue to open up the spaces. And all of the jobs I've had, the incredible one. And then now to be at Interfaith Alliance, where it's just an incredible privilege to serve as president, to be able to come with my full self, to be able to work on issues of LGBTQ equality alongside democracy issues and reproductive freedom and voting rights and anti-censorship, all these things that we work on, but to be able to bring my full self to work. And so I'm just starting with gratitude this Pride, and I'm so thankful because we have so much work to do. So much that is yet to be done. And for the first time in a while, I'm feeling like the possibility of these things that I'm so grateful for being taken away, that there might be a receding of rights, that people are really working hard to strip me of my right to have my children. People are working really hard to saying maybe the right to my marriage shouldn't be there. People are working incredibly hard against my trans friends and siblings, and really trying to roll things back. And so this Pride, I am filled with gratitude for all of you listeners and Interfaith Alliance that has been doing so much for LGBTQ equality for 30 years. I'm so grateful for this position, but I'm also recognizing we're in a critical moment and we need to show up and come together. If you are looking for a way to do that, go to faithforpride.org. Interfaith Alliance is working with an amazing collective of people. But mostly, I just want to, urge you to show up and recognize that there's still so much work to be done. And I say that definitely with a spirit of gratitude and hope, but also a sense of urgency for the moment. So happy Pride, everyone. I hope you enjoy these interviews today. I certainly enjoyed doing them. And now to my first guest. Reverend Kimble Sorrells is an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ and is dedicated to integrating spirituality with social activism. Kimble is a trans-identifying pastor seeking to support transgender people's well-being through increasing access to wellness and resilience skills, while also organizing to counter anti-transgender legislation and other oppressive forces. Kimble is a member of our brand new Interfaith Leadership Network. Yay! A select group of diverse faith leaders from across the country, each working on individual projects to collectively strengthen interfaith relationships and positively impact their communities. In addition to a Master's of Divinity from Candler School of Theology at Emory University, Reverend Sorrells holds a certification in cognitively based compassion training and is a registered yoga teacher. And I am delighted to have them with us on the State of Belief. Kimble, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
My goodness, I am so excited. One, it was so great to meet you in Washington D.C. Listeners, we gathered. I think I told you about this earlier, but we gathered all these wonderful people from across the country to our convening in Washington D.C. And Reverend Kimble was there as part of our this new program that we launched, the Interfaith Leadership Network, which we had dreamed about for so long. And then it's wonderful when your dreams are actually even better than what you hoped they would be. And Reverend Kimball, I hope you enjoyed yourself in DC.
I did. It's been a few years actually since I've been back up to DC to lobby, and so it was really, really great to be back in the city and to meet everyone from the cohort, as well as just the wider network, and just see the connections and the potential places of collaboration and learn from each other. It was really just wonderful to be there. So thank you for having me.
Oh my goodness, it was our pleasure. So, Kimball, maybe you can kind of take us back. I actually don't know what part of the country you grew up in and a little bit about your background and how you arrived at this amazing place, important place of offering others hope and potential in this moment that we're in where we need it so much. So where do you come from, and how did the evolution of your identity as a person of faith as well as a trans leader and trans man evolve?
Yeah, so I'll try to give you the short version because it is quite a journey. I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama. So, I think like the buckle of the Bible Belt, and came into the faith community sort of by kind of what many might call like a dramatic conversion experience in early adolescence, where I, in this, as part of this process, thought that, God was wanting me to be straight. And so, looking back, I think that the turning point there for me was the interest in spirituality, not that God wanted me to be straight, but was the desire to know God was what I think as the starting point of my journey at that point. So sort of in spite of all of the other things happening around me, I just didn't have the people to quite nurture that in the right way. But so came out of the evangelical community, went to college, was in very right-wing scholarship programs, let's just say. Uh, I won't drop any other funders now. I won't throw them too much shade, but was in very, kind of conservative circles, even doing some even involved in some of the like kind of what might be considered like right-wing kind of apologetics type
Uh-huh.
activities as well.
Was this
Um,
in Alabama, or had you gone somewhere else for
yeah,
college?
so no, this was well, I grew up in Alabama, went to high school in Alabama, went to college up at Barrett College in Rome, Georgia.
Okay.
So still in the South. Barry is a non-denominational Christian based university, but it tends to the student body overall tends to be more evangelical or Southern Baptist. But there are progressive people and there are progressive professors. And so it was actually there that I actually kind of came out the first time late in my college career. Because despite all of my trying to be straight and all of the things, it was just like, this isn't working. This is not working and this is hurting me. And I would say the academic study of religion, I was a religion major, really was the means of deconstructing. But I think it took a while. It was easier for my head to come around to deconstructing my faith. It took a little while longer for me to trust it and to believe it and to believe that God loved me as I am. And so that was sort of college, and at that time also kind of discerning a call to ministry. And then, came down to Atlanta after college, was in AmeriCorps. So that experience was really formative to me of working with the homeless population here in Atlanta. And that was a whole new crisis of faith, of seeing just the pain in the world, um, in a way that I think I had really been sheltered from growing up. So more kind of re-examining faith at that time in a different way, and came into the United Church of Christ at that time, and found a place where all of myself was welcome, but also all of my questions and questions about what I was seeing, in the streets of Atlanta and the pain and the suffering. And, so started on the ordination track around that time. Went to Candler. It was at Candler that I started to sort of understand my gender identity. It's still very early in the stage, I would say. Kind of was aware of my, being non-binary, but just didn't really quite know how to live into that, what that looked like. And I think, the the sort of like trying to get through all the things of ordination and all that, I think I sort of maybe sort of pushed it a little to the back burner, and didn't really fully live into that until after I kind of completed that process. So that's sort of my faith journey. And then, I think in terms of my interest in contemplative practices, I think I've always sort of been a little bit of a mystic, and had that desire to connect with God or the divine, if that language works better for people. Um, that's always been there. And then, it was really kind of after seminary that I was able to start exploring that with different programs, you know, whether that's some of the formation programs at like Columbia Seminary here, have some
Mm.
classes that I took, yoga, um, and was just really able to find a lot of peace in that, but also just a lot of like really practical help. Just
Mm.
like that uh, can be really helpful in just alleviating distress and um, giving skills for coping. So,
Yeah.
kind of have, as I left parish ministry and was sort of in the nonprofit sector for a while, just have always kind of been sort of dancing in two worlds a little bit in that regard of bivocational ministry. When I started working at Emory and got trained in cognitively based compassion training, or you might hear me just say CBCT for short. I feel a little bit less like I'm doing two different things at once. I feel a little more co-vocational now,
Uh-huh.
which is lovely. And really, I think just in the last several years, as I've been doing activism and doing contemplative work, and just sort of as those have sort of danced together a little bit, I've just seen the need for them to be more intentionally integrated.
Uh-huh.
And I think,
Yeah.
especially as we're in this time of really, just, I guess, just hatefulness. I don't know how to say it other
Yeah.
than that. It's just,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
the legislations that we're facing, those kind of
Yeah.
things.
Yeah. It's an amazing story. And it is, I think one of the things that's so helpful to hear stories like yours for younger people, but also for, all of our listeners to just recognize that it's not one and done. Like,
Mhm.
this idea of constantly learning, constantly asking the next question, constantly, being curious about what's inviting you into the next thing. I just think it's so, just hearing the specifics of your journey, and how admirable it is that you never just shut it all down or just decided I'm just going to ignore it because it's not a convenient way for me to go. I mean, even like your initial, come to Jesus moment, whatever it looked like, you recognize it as some sort of desire to know God. And I think that's a really beautiful thing, which is still true today in your contemplative practice. It may look very different, but it's driven from the same spiritual exercise that has driven the mystics and the truly religious for since the beginning of time, which is to know the spirit, know divine. You choose your language. It's just a really important. And I think what I really want to emphasize here is that this is also intertwined with your understanding who you are and becoming truly. And so, and that these stories are the stories. They are the religious testimonies of our time.
Hmm.
And we tend to kind of go very quickly to how people present to us in the moment, not
Hmm.
recognizing the incredible stories that bring them to that moment. And so I just want to thank you for taking the time to bring us in that. And I I love the story. I also I think it's very powerful in the context of this moment and of the project that you're bringing to the Interfaith Leadership Network. I understand that you're hoping to do is actually create resources, especially for trans people who are feeling attacked from all sides, and giving them wellness techniques based on all of your spiritual wisdom. Can you talk a little bit more about kind of the what you're working on right now, and what it hopefully will offer? Sounds like life giving strategies for and tools in this, as you'd call it, a very hateful time.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I feel like it's something that has a lot of I think it has some different facets to it, I guess. And I am really interested to see sort of where it will go as things unfold. I think there is the very practical side of things, which is we as people of faith have the responsibility uh to be engaged and to act in a way that can potentially counter some of what we're seeing happening legislatively, verbally, those kinds of things. We've been saying for years that, a certain particular population has tried to claim the faith voice and, kind of weaponize that. So I think that's a part of it is that we as people of faith have that responsibility to reclaim that faith voice, to say that this is not in my values, to say that we affirm trans and queer people, to try to protect the youth in particular that are, I think, being affected by this, and to engage in a way that gets involved in the process, the legislative processes that are happening. We're out of session right now in Georgia, so there's not a ton happening here. But I think that's the sort of the practical component of it is how do we continue to build these interfaith relationships here and everywhere, really, but building those networks so that when these things happen, we're able to respond in a way that we can try to counter those harmful bills, harmful legislation, harmful rhetoric. That's one piece of it because the reality is that, again, we can train and offer care and offer contemplation, but if we're not alleviating or at least seeking to alleviate the causes of distress, I think that's an inadequate response.
Right.
Um, so that's a piece of it is that practical part, but I think it's also, how is it that we as people of faith, communities of faith, congregations, how is it that we can then also provide care, provide resources, provide ritual, provide space to care for people who are experiencing really tremendous causes of distress, whether that's legislation again, or just like even just the rhetoric, which itself, I think, one thing I like to tell people is even if a bill doesn't pass, there's trauma that happens to the community just by enduring the anxiety of will this pass? There's trauma from listening to having your humanity debated on the
Right.
public stage, right? So I do believe that people of faith have the ability to provide care in response to that, whether that's, kind of in times of distress, kind of providing healing spaces, providing workshops that could potentially offer things like any of the kind of contemplative practices or wellness skills like CBCT. Communities of faith have that network to be able to offer that. But I
Yeah.
also think, thinking of ourselves as even how do we even get in there and provide care even in the moment? Like, can we show up as chaplains, at the
Mm,
ropes when we're lobbying, right?
mm,
When people
mm.
are actively experiencing, emotional dysregulation in that moment. So that's, I guess, kind of high
Yeah.
level view is those two facets of it, both very practical,
Yeah.
but also like how do we network to provide and increase our care and support to the community?
What I like, it's very holistic, it's comprehensive, but and it doesn't. It recognizes that it's all important, and it isn't an either or. You can actually
Hmm.
do them together. I want to read one thing. I went on your wonderful website, and I want to just
Thank you.
mention it to the listeners. It's revkimble.com. And it's really a beautiful website, very kind of simply laid out, but you do have a blog, and you did this really beautiful piece to young trans youth. And there was a passage that jumped out to me, and I'm going to read it. I'm going to read your words at you.
Okay.
But it says, "On the days when the world seems cruel, I remember that my transness is a spiritual gift to myself and the world around me. It is a blessing to embody a transcendent space in the same way that so many spiritual realities defy categories or definition." And I just think that that is wonderful to kind of flip the narrative and make sure that people understand, actually, no, this isn't something like I'm surviving. It's actually the gift that I was
Mhm.
given that informs the spirituality that I am offering in the world and that I'm experiencing and that I'm sharing. I mean, I just think it's such an important message, and it expands, it expands the idea of what spirituality can be and should be in all of our lives. But it comes out of your reality. So talk a little bit about what was behind that passage, but then also your desire to write to younger trans folks who might be feeling bereft at this moment.
Sure. Oh goodness. And I think that particular one I actually even wrote a little bit earlier, as we were first starting to get some of these bills coming down. I think the spirituality behind it for me, um, I think often, you look at like Genesis 1 gets kind of thrown at trans people. It's like, well, God made man and woman. Um, but if God, it says if both of these entities are in God's image, then God encompasses both man and woman and everything in between. And so in that way, I tell people, yeah, like so we reflect a different aspect of the image of God and reflect the expansiveness of God that is not bound into a binary. And my like I can sometimes be a little bit snarky and mildly off color, but in seminary people would say, well, I don't understand non-binary. Like, are you like, is it man, woman? Like, what are you, how does that work? And I said, well, okay, Candler Emory students being very progressive that you are, I said, well, all right, is God a man? And they like good Candler students said, oh no, no, I use gender inclusive language for God. And I said, well, is God a woman? They say, no, well, no, not exactly. I said, well, there you go. I'm just more like God than you are. And then they're like, oh, so okay, yeah.
Nice.
And I
No,
say,
but it's
yeah.
even to that point, you go into churches and where they just like God the Father, God the Father, God the Father, and I'm just like, that just is, to me. It just rings idolatrous, actually, like that we're just giving God a you know a pronoun that God doesn't prefer, if you don't,
Sure.
if you will, and it just is, it really, I almost can't sit through it anymore, and
Hmm.
and I think that that's a gift that you gave them. I mean,
Hmm.
I don't know that are more God than anyone, but I
Right,
do
right.
think that I understand. But the point is very well taken. Yeah, what right now? I mean, I live in New York City,
Hmm.
and we just discovered that a school board for my district, I have two kids in school, for my district, pass an anti-trans resolution.
Hmm.
And they do it in the name of like protecting.
Hmm.
It's always, I guess, protecting women. I mean, like
Yeah.
girls, or I mean, and it's very interesting how erased trans men are from that whole
Hmm.
conversation. I'm curious if I mean, you're much, you've been thinking about this a lot more than I have, but it's always, and they, they're like, oh no, this isn't anti-trans, but then actually, when you actually push them on it, it's very anti-trans, and 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 it's just been so disturbing. I mean, a lot of us have been rallying, against this, showing up to the school board and all of this. But, you know, I just think it must feel very, very difficult in this moment when we have 500 plus bills across the country that are largely targeting trans, because they've decided,
Hmm.
we're not really going to win necessarily on the,
Yep.
on the marriage issue or the love, we're going to, but trans, we can make them scary.
Hmm.
So I don't know. I'm curious, like how you're maintaining, but then also like how can other members of the LGBTQ community be
Yeah.
better allies in this moment?
Yeah. So all great questions, and it is a really difficult time. I think for me personally, leaning into my practices, leaning into this piece of resilience where, like I say, I'm not actually more like God than other people. It's a joke, right? But like
No,
to
no, we get
to
it.
celebrate the things about myself, whether
Yeah.
that's whether that's, being a parent, whether that's, any of the things that are great in my life, to lean into that, to lean into my practices, to using the skills I have to, just stay in as much as I can in the moment without going down the rabbit trail of what ifs.
Yeah.
Those are all kind of some of the ways that I'm help kind of personally, uh, personally coping. Leaning into community. I think especially during Pride Month, finding that leaning into the places of trans joy because we need
Mm.
that. And in the midst of all of this.
Can you just say a couple more
Mhm.
words about what that means when you say
Mm.
leaning into trans joy? I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah. So, I think, well, and it means different things for different people, right? But like all of the ways that we celebrate who we are in our existence, whether that's, a spiritual kind of thing for me of sort of seeing the ways that I reflect the image of God, whether that's, trans joy that delights in their creativity and their art, whether that's performance art, whether that's, painting, I think that we are people that create and recreate ourselves, uh, seeing, just the ways that we are wonderful, and just celebrating that and celebrating our community and our resilience, and our strength. Yeah, because I know, it's like, yeah, things are really hard, but we're also kind of like, we're strong, you know? So that's also true. Um, in terms of allyship, yeah. Whew, we need it. And I think, um, I appreciate you highlighting, I think we often think of allyship as being something that only straight people do. But I think in terms of trans allyship, yeah, LGB, or other, non-trans queer folk, can show up and should show up, to, sometimes that can be as simple as just disrupting, when someone's saying something or misgendering, things like that to speak up in conversations. Also getting involved in legislative efforts, showing up to things, uh, and it's important not to like, center over trans voices, but to come in and be alongside trans people as we are doing this. You know, Sometimes it's even just when something crappy happens or a crappy bill passes or passes through one stage to another, just like reach out, and just
Mm.
acknowledge, even just acknowledging things are really hard right now. Um, you know, get someone a cup of tea, I mean,
Mm.
just
Mm.
being in it with us, I think is really important in this time.
That's excellent, excellent advice, and something I think we can all hear. So, what you know? I read something from a piece that you wrote to a young trans person who might be feeling disheartened. If someone is kind of either at the beginning stage of their process or beginning to have these, wonder and really feeling like, you mentioned, you in Montgomery, not Montgomery. You weren't in Montgomery. Where were you?
Birmingham,
Birmingham.
Birmingham,
Sorry.
Alabama. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But you didn't have anywhere to turn. Like for someone who is beginning to have these questions, where would you recommend that our listeners could point people if they know of anybody in that situation, or encourage people? What are some resources out there, online resources
Hmm.
yourself have developed, or just places that feel really important for people who are, especially those who might be coming out or in a religious community who don't want to
Hmm.
throw out that in order
Sure.
to go here. What are some resources you can encourage people to investigate?
Sure. Well, some of it depends on where you are located, obviously. But I think in terms of faith resources, there are affirming faith communities. I think I always tell people don't just go where you're tolerated, go where you're celebrated. And
Mm,
um, for all of the bad things that came out of COVID, the fact that you can live stream just about any church service all over the country is maybe perhaps in this case something that I think is the blessings of where we are as a very digital place is that you can join online. There are support groups online. There are support communities online. Um, I do think Transmission is one that's doing a lot of online work in particular around faith stuff, and I think has a lot of engagement. Usually, if you can go to your either closest Pride organization or like closest Equality Federation organization, they're going to have a list of resources for your area. Um, different. Um, there's different online site like if you go to any of the denominational sites, you can search for churches that have like what we call in UCC open and affirming congregations.
right, right,
I think Presbyterians have a different name,
right.
Methodist
More
it's
light
Reconciling
or something
Ministries.
like
Yeah,
that.
more like
Yeah,
Presbyterians. Yeah. So
yeah,
I think going to those places, is kind of like one of the best things to do. And I think in as much as we can have those in person, in real life connections, it's great. Even if it's one or two close friends, that's something. But I think utilizing those online networks can be helpful when needed, especially to get
yeah.
access to care and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we one of the things we ask everybody on this show is the question, "What gives you hope?"
Hmm.
And so I want to invite you to let us know what gives you hope as a source of inspiration.
Hmm. There's a lot of things that give me hope, but maybe the ability that I see in people to care deeply and to love deeply, that I think is the catalyst that can fuel all of this. And I have seen people who have surprised me along the years who you would have never thought would have come around, have come around. And, I've seen people that, defy the stereotypes, I think a lot of people think that people who are older aren't necessarily going to be affirming, but I've had some like amazing adopted grandparents, um, you know, unofficial adopted grandparents through my faith community who have um, just loved on me at different places in life. And so I think if there's anything that gives me hope, it's that I believe that we as humans have a very deep and real innate capacity to love. Um, and that through our faith practices, it's through our, whether it's contemplative practices, whether it's ritual, whatever, like we can grow and cultivate that and extend that to more and more people. And uh, that can really change things, right? Because if we love people, if I can see how this person is, like me, then that's going to shift things a lot.
Mm. Reverend Kimble Sorrells is dedicated to advocating for justice and using contemplative practices to foster peace and resolve among justice makers. They're an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ. Kimble, thank you so much for being with us today on the State of Belief, and happy Pride.
Happy Pride. Thank you so much for having me.
Up next, Faith for Pride 2024 partner Keshet. We'll hear from Community Mobilization Manager Lanie Cohen. You can hear full episodes of The State of Belief anytime on our website at stateofbelief.com. You'll also find links to topics we discussed this week, as well as transcripts and more. And make sure you subscribe at stateofbelief.com/subscribe. You're listening to The State of Belief, where religion and democracy meet. Welcome back to the State of Belief. I'm Interfaith Alliance President, Reverend Paul Brandeis Rauschenbusch. Lanie Cohen is Community Mobilization Manager at Keshet, an organization dedicated to LGBTQ equality in Jewish life. Lanie has a rich background in social justice and community building, from facilitating gender violence prevention trainings in college to contributing to the passage of progressive policies such as the Reproductive Health Equity Act. She's a wonderful part of the Faith for Pride coalition that includes Interfaith Alliance, Keshet, and other leading organizations working for the dignity and inclusion of everyone. Lanie, welcome to the State of Belief.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Oh my goodness. I'm so glad. You know, the last time we saw each other, it was in person, and we were tromping from one office on the Hill to another, like all these congressional offices, mostly Republican offices, and we were talking about the writers. Do you remember this?
Yeah, which many have ended up failing.
Yeah, well, that was actually like a really kind of great example of, you know, just informing offices of what's going on, because most of the people we were talking to weren't even sure what we went in there talking about these anti-LGBTQ writers that were being attached to the appropriation to the budget bill, and they were like, "Wait, what? What are you talking about?" And then when we explained it to them and reminded them that the majority of people, and especially religious people in America, are not in favor of anti-LGBT equality writers and things like that, they were kind of like, okay, well, I'm going to study this more and bring this up to the members. So it just seemed like a very positive, I mean, I'd be interested in your memory of that experience.
It's always a funny thing to be the one informing the legislators on the bills they will be voting on, but that's why we have to do it, right?
Right. I mean, especially showing up and explaining things to legislators really matters. And so it's an invitation to all of our listeners. It actually matters that you reach out to your, representatives, your legislators, your school board members, and explain to them what's going on and your perspective on it. And it really makes a difference. And so that was actually kind of an amazing thing that pretty much everyone we visited voted no on those riders. And, and so we Interfaith Alliance just appreciates the partnership with Keshet so much, and happy Pride. I guess I should have started with that. Happy Pride. But Lanie, can you just give me a little bit of your own background? Like, kind of, I'm not sure where you grew up. Like, were you raised in a religious home? Tell me a little bit about your own spiritual background and how that intersects with your amazing activism today.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. I grew up in Chicagoland, Highland Park, Illinois, and that included a secular Jewish or culturally Jewish upbringing where I was not attending synagogue or observing high holidays, but our faith was a reason to rally in the community and around the table with family members. And so after leaving Chicago, I went to the University of Denver and spent a lot of time in Denver working for our state legislature. I was on the staff of our House Majority Leader, and she was the first lesbian majority leader in Colorado. That was a treat. We worked a lot on labor issues, on LGBTQ issues, and passed some really awesome legislation to protect abortion access and reproductive health in the state of Colorado.
I just want to pause for a second just to acknowledge, like, there's so many different ways to be Jewish. And I think that, I think sometimes, like, people who are not, having my closest cousins being Jewish and realize even within my family, there's so many different manifestations. And it doesn't necessarily always require this overt religiosity, but there's another part of Judaism that, which is like this really strong secular social justice through line. And that's actually much more the tradition that my family is in, is like this really, a sense of Judaism is definitely a part of who they were, but also this real drive towards making the world a better place, in some ways informed by that, that heritage. And so I just think it's really important that we always pause and say, like, there's so many different ways to be everything right these days, and no one gets to be like the standard of this is the way it's done.
I don't know who said this or where it came from, but I've heard a quote once, like, there are millions of Jews and millions of ways to do Judaism, right? Like,
I love that. I really love that. And it's just so important to mention that today, right now, when it's almost like there's a struggle to figure out, like, what is true Judaism? What does it really mean? And I think it's just great to pause. So you have all this background that you're bringing to this work that you're doing today.
Yeah, I have had the privilege of working in politics, kind of seeing how the sausage gets made, return of phrase, and taking that knowledge to the community-based side of things to try to use our Jewish values, our Jewish faith to make a difference in where the needle lands and changing the narrative to say that faith and religion are incompatible, right? We have a rise in Christian nationalism and extremism that tells us that faith has to look like this one thing, right? Exactly what we were saying. Our interpretation of faith is that there is no monolithic way to be religious. And that is why it's important we use our religious narratives to say, our religion looks like this. It looks like respecting the inherent dignity and worth of all people. It looks like going to the Capitol and telling our legislators that there's no place for anti-LGBTQ budget amendment riders, a whole plethora of things.
Yeah. And I really love this phrase, how the sausage is made, and it's a little grotesque, and you're like, oh, let's skip over that. But one of the things that I actually have really
how the kosher sausage is.
Yes, how the kosher, of course, how the vegan sausage is made. But I think that the idea of, like, really understanding how laws are created, passed. We have that, I'm old enough to remember this Schoolhouse Rock that was like, I'm just a bill. But I do think we forget that every bill has an origin story. And then it has, like, this people really trying to figure out how to make the bill pass. I remember, I've been doing this long project about my grandmother who, she and her husband created the first unemployment compensation bill in the nation. And they really worked so hard to figure out, how do we get what we need and also have it pass? It was like all these different things. And I just think it's really important, like, people like you who have really been through it. That's part of what, it's not all glamour, Lanie. I mean, I know the majority of your life is just glamour.
That also is what inspired me to be in this role, right? I was sitting outside the legislator's office, seeing all the good faith efforts of advocates in the community and listening to people's personal narratives and their stories and their experiences and trying to uplift those. That is what supplements all of the legislative work, is humans behind it that need the bill to pass to protect their family or protect their civil rights, right?
100%.
That's the piece that is integral to any bill being passed.
Right. It's about coalition, and it's also about narrative, and it's just about, like, this will land this way for this community, and how wonderful it will be. Now, tell me a little bit about Keshet. For those who haven't heard of this amazing organization that is really a close partner to Interfaith Alliance, especially in our work around LGBTQ equality and rights, what's the origin story of Keshet, and what is the thing that you are most working on right now?
Yeah, so Keshet is over 20 years old and started in a suburb in Massachusetts as a way for LGBTQ Jews to be connected to each other. And it's really evolved from there, right? It is now a major part of the Jewish institutional world, trying to make sure that every Jewish space is ready to accept and affirm the dignity and worth of LGBTQ Jews and our families. That looks like a lot of different things. We have an education and training team that goes into these spaces, whether it be day schools or summer camps, and teaches them that cultural competency piece that is really important to respecting and affirming community members. And then I am on the community mobilization side of things, which means that after those spaces, they respect one another, they have the language to talk about LGBTQ identity and issues. They know that LGBTQ Jews belong in their spaces and always will be in their spaces. And then they think, what can I do to make the world a better place for my community, for the LGBTQ people in my community? And we teach them, how to think about things Jewishly, how to think about taking social action by using your Jewish values, again, to go to the public arena and say, this is what my faith says about LGBTQ rights. It says that it is an inherent part of our tradition and our faith, and that we can use that perspective and that identity to bolster the argument for LGBTQ rights.
Well,
and we've also recently added a Jews of Color department, programming department, and so we are doing programs specifically for Jews of Color as well.
Uh-huh. I think it's so important to kind of recognize the need within our own communities. I mean, I can't even begin to talk to you about the Christian world, which is like so. But I think it's really important that the way that you're framing this is that this is not an external effort to kind of make the Jews accept LGBTQ people. It's actually a Jewish effort to make sure that everyone within the Jewish community is accepted within the Jewish world, which is a very different kind of frame. And it allows people who might be a little less immediately inclined to say, okay, we do want to represent the Jewish people in our lives, and we don't want to leave people out. So, like, what have we not been seeing? And I can imagine there's lots of aha moments. I mean, that's just the way, the world is. All of us have had these aha moments where I didn't even see that until you told me. And it's very important to be open to that. Do you find that the Jewish community is largely open to your work?
I'd say so, yes, especially because I have the honor of going into the places where the education and training team has already kind of provided that language, that understanding. I can go and build upon that. But to circle back to what you were just saying about like thinking about what is already in our community, I think part of this is realizing that LGBTQ Jews have always existed and been a part of our history, of our stories, of our culture. It's not a new phenomenon. Maybe we just have this new language to talk about ourselves and to talk about our experiences. But LGBTQ Jews have always been our people. And so it's only going to become more and more important to make sure our spaces are inclusive. Our youth program teams works very hard to put on programs by and for queer and trans youth and create those spaces where they can say, this is the world we're going to live in. This is the world we're going to build together. And it looks like everyone in this room, right?
Yeah. Isn't that incredible? So what are some of the big projects that are underway that feel daunting, but that you want to let our listeners know are happening in case they have any way of supporting you? Like, what is something that you're, that Keshet as a whole or you're embarking on that is like, whoa, this is a major project, but we're going to go in?
right? Dismantling Christian hegemony and Christian nationalism. That's our next project. No, I'm just kidding.
I was like, awesome, good. I could take that off my list because Keshet's going to do it. That's
yeah,
great.
yeah. That's on the list, right? But maybe I can zoom in and be a little bit more specific. For any members of the Jewish community listening to this, if you are part of a Jewish organization or institution, that I co-facilitate a coalition called Thrive. We facilitate this with Sojourn, and this coalition aims to create a world where trans youth are not under attack. We work with over 250 Jewish organizations to think about how to stop negative policy on the state level and bolster positive legislation to protect LGBTQ rights. And really, it has an educational and community-based format where we learn from one another, we talk to one another, and we see what can we do to be a coordinated effort to protect trans youth when there is a very coordinated effort to attack the rights of trans youth.
It really, it's incredible the amount of vitriol and negativity and violence that the trans community is experiencing, and some of that violence comes in the form of the legislation that is being proposed and what it indicates, and someone else knows better than the people who themselves how to care for themselves. And I just find it.
We can zoom that outward, right? We could talk about bodily autonomy in terms of gender affirming care, or we could talk about bodily autonomy in terms of reproductive health and abortion rights and access. Right. So it kind of demonstrates how all of this really is a coordinated effort to attack our rights, but that is why we have to be coordinated in our response, and we have to talk to one another, and we have to community build and coalition build and be in conversation about these difficult topics. And I think it's important to note that, it's not that the American population that is against trans identity or LGBTQ rights, right? This is a really coordinated, intentional effort by extremist politicians and their supporters to reach voters that are on the margins and who will be motivated to go to the polls if they think that their rights are at stake. And if we can make this a moral issue of, trans kids are making your kids unsafe in school, then they can realize that that helps bring maybe parents to the polls that didn't have a reason to go before. And now they feel like they have something they need to show up for. But that's not how we want to do our politics. We don't want to fearmonger. We don't want to make people afraid about their rights. We want to say that it's not a competition. We can all create school spaces where our children can be safe. And we could do that by, like you asked me what Keshet's working on, is getting people to vote for our general election. And vote with LGBTQ rights in mind, and vote with thinking about what is going to protect my community. Is it based in hate and fear, or is it based in love and community?
Thank you so much for that. I really, really appreciate that. And it's so important also, a lot of times people hide behind religion when they're talking about these radical anti-trans policies and anti-LGBTQ writ large, as well as abortion rights laws, and yet religious people do not support that across the board. The majority of religious people do not support it, and so we have to also be really loud about reminding politicians and reminding one another that doesn't represent the religious point of view for Americans writ large, and that this is a very radicalized minority religious position that is trying to impose their view on the rest of us. And so it's helpful for you to say that. We are a podcast radio show that really believes in also lifting up the possibility and hope. And so I always ask every guest, what is giving you hope right now? So Lanie, what is giving you hope right now?
What's giving me hope is the amount of people like you and I who show up and do this work. I see my wonderful colleagues, my friends, other community members who they're putting their life's purpose and their 40 hours plus a week to thinking about how can I make the world a better place. That gives me hope because it's not easy. And if we can choose to continue to show up for one another, and that can be outside of, an official employment. That's just how I'm thinking about it, because that's my route to work in the justice realm. But we can think about how our lives can be meant for showing up for one another and making our world a better place. That is the hope, is seeing the dignity in one another when we do this work. And I'll always show up because I know that there are people around me who are coming at it with the same amount of energy and force as I would hope to. They inspire me.
Thank you so much. Lanie Cohen is Community Mobilization Manager at Keshet, working for LGBTQ equality in Jewish life. Again, this year, Keshet is an important partner in the Faith for Pride initiative. Find out more and join at faithforpride.org. Lanie, thank you so much for making the time to be with us today on the State of Belief, and happy Pride.
Thank you. I am so lucky to be your colleague and co-conspirator. Thanks for having me.
Please be sure to subscribe to The State of Belief at Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform, or at stateofbelief.com/subscribe. We need your help to keep making The State of Belief. Become a partner in this crucial work with a financial contribution today. Information on how to donate is available at stateofbelief.com. That's stateofbelief.com. And share what you're getting out of this show with the people in your networks. Let's get more people listening and keep these conversations going on Facebook and Instagram and Threads at State of Belief. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of Religion News Service or Religion News Foundation. The State of Belief is produced by Ray Kirstein and is a production of Interfaith Alliance. Become a member today at interfaithalliance.org. And be sure to join us next week. I can't wait. Until then, I'm Paul Brandeis Rauschenbusch on The State of Belief, where religion and democracy meet.